All right, on to the heart. Here we go. Of course, you know that it is the main pump of the cardiovascular system. It is the pump. You know, it's about the size of your fist. It sits not directly in the center of your chest, but it's a little bit off to the right. 2/3 of it is off to the left. I apologize. It has a flat top and a pointed bottom, and the pointed bottom is actually the apex, and the top is called the base. The sac that it is found in, you know, is the pericardium. That pericardium has a connective tissue outer layer. That's the fibrous portion of it. Then inside of that is a sac, and that sac has a visceral, which is on top of the heart, and a parietal, which lines the cavity, which is covered in the fibrous pericardium. There's a space there with a little bit of fluid. That's pericardial fluid. It's there to help reduce the friction as the heart beats. That visceral layer, you can also refer to it as the epicardium. Put it in your pocket. Epi, E-P-I, means upon. So this is the layer that is upon the surface of the heart. Now, when you think about the heart itself, there's 3 layers to that. There is the epicardium, which we already mentioned. There's the muscle portion, myo, that M-Y-O means muscle, myo. And then there's this inner lining, this endothelial lining. It's a single cell thick and such. And it's on top of a little bit of connective tissue right there. And that is the endocardium. You know, it covers everything inside the heart. Everything. Mixed in with the muscle is a connective tissue framework. It's like a scaffolding that the muscle builds off of. All of your other skeletal muscle is attached to bone, gives it something to pull against. The heart, though it is striated muscle, and it's similar to skeletal muscle in that aspect, it doesn't have anything to pull against. So this inner connective tissue framework is what it allows it to build upon to form its shape. If you'll go back and think about connective tissue and how connective tissue repairs itself with a stromal repair or with a hold on, had to figure my word out, or a one that gets repaired where it replaces itself and replaces its function. The word will come to me in a minute and I'll yell it out. But the stromal is where it gets replaced with fibers, i.e. scar. So when you damage the heart, remember, muscle does not regenerate. And so the damaged muscle is replaced by scar tissue. And one thing that scar tissue does not do, it doesn't contract like the heart muscles do and such. So something to think about. The valves are made up of this connective tissue as well. They are covered in that endocardium or that endothelium and such, but they are connective tissue. The chordae tendineae, the heartstrings, connective tissue and such. When you look at a sagittal view, or really a frontal view, when you look at a frontal view, a coronal cut of the heart, you'll notice you have the chambers and such. And when we look at the ventricles, which is the actual pumping chambers, then the left ventricle is thicker because it pumps the blood to your body, and whereas the right ventricle pumps the blood to the heart. So you have two sides, two different circuits, if you will. You have a pulmonary circuit and you have a body circuit. Looking on the external heart, the outer view of it, you're going to see grooves. And if you go back to the nervous system, a groove in the brain we called a sulcus. So you'll see the same thing on the heart here. You have these sulci. There's one that is between the atria and the ventricles. That's the coronary sulcus. And then there's a groove that runs down the front, kind of at an angle, the front side, and that is the anterior interventricular sulcus. It's a groove between the ventricles on the front, on the anterior side. And then if you'll look on the back of the heart, you'll see the same thing. They just call it a posterior. It's within these grooves that the blood vessels ride. You don't want a rounded out solid structure with your blood vessel sitting on top. That was the case anytime it got pushed up against the chest wall, it would cut off the blood supply. So the blood vessels are down in these grooves in order to protect the heart itself. The chambers, it is a 4-chambered heart. Think of it like that. When you learn about animals and animal physiology, 2-chambered heart, 3-chambered heart, 4-chambered incomplete, 4-chambered complete. As a mammal, we have a 4-chambered complete heart. You really have a pulmonary side and a systemic, a body side. So on the pulmonary side, it's a 2-chambered structure. It has an atria, which is a receiving, and then a ventricle, which is the actual pump. The left side, you have the atria, which is the receiving, and then the ventricle, which is the actual pump. So the atria, both the right and the left atria, work at the same time. They work jointly. And then the ventricles, the right and left ventricles, they pump at the same time as such. But the right side is the pulmonary. It receives the deoxygenated blood from the body and sends it to the lungs where the gas exchange takes place. The left side is the systemic, that means body. And so it receives the freshly oxygenated blood from the lungs, and then it pumps it out to the rest of the body, including the heart itself. The right atrium, when you look at it internally, the back side is smooth, but the front side has some ridges or bumps, and those are known as pectinate muscles and such. You'll see those when they go into the auricle of the right atrium. An auricle is a pouch, if you think of it. The left atrium is all smooth and such, but its auricle also has the pectinate muscles. The ventricles, when you look internally at the ventricles and such, you'll see these rounded out cable-looking structures, and that is the tuberculae carnae, and they will come to a point, a bump, if you will, and you see their notes cone-shaped, and that is known as the papillary muscle. A papilla is a bump, and the heartstrings, the chordae tendineae, attach from that papillary muscle up to the AV valves. So like I told you a while ago, the right atrium receives the deoxygenated blood from the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava and the coronary sinus. That's the 3 ways that it gets into the right atrium. It'll then pass through a valve, the right atrioventricular valve, the right AV valve. From there, it passes into the right ventricle. And then when the right ventricle fills to a point and it's triggered, it contracts, and then it will eject that blood, not all of it, the majority of it, out through a pulmonary semilunar valve. And it's through that valve that it goes up to the pulmonary trunk, to the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs. And so it receives, the right ventricle receives the blood from the right AV valve. The right AV valve has 3 flaps, or 3 cusps, so they call it a tricuspid. In the medical field, you'll say tricuspid and mitral, and I'll do that to you as well. In the educational side of it, I stick with right AV valve, left AV valve, and I don't get confused. The pulmonary semilunar valve, they call it a semilunar valve because here the cusp are half moon shaped, semilunar, half moon and such. And in each one, it's 3 little pouches. They look kind of like parachutes opening up when they work and all. So, but it's in the pulmonary trunk. So most books, the modern books, just call it the pulmonary valve. I fall back to my raisin and I call it the pulmonary semilunar valve. So, but that feeds from the right atrium through the pulmonary semilunar valve to the pulmonary trunk, and then the pulmonary trunk, like a trunk of a tree, branches into the right and left, and that carries the deoxygenated blood to the lungs. The lungs do the gas exchange, and then the left atrium receives this rich oxygenated blood from the pulmonary veins. The pulmonary veins feed into the left atrium. There it passes through the left AV valve, which it actually has 2 flaps or 2 cusps, so it's called a bicuspid. Another older name is the mitral valve because it looks like to somebody, it looked like a priest hat or a mitre. That's the story I was told on that one. So I was never allowed to call it tricuspid or bicuspid or mitral, we always had to do left AV, right AV, and we were happy people. So then that left ventricle receives this fresh oxygenated blood, contracts, and ejects that blood through the left or through the aortic simulant valve, which is a valve. It has these cusps that are half moon shaped, and the aorta at the base of it there has 3 of them, and it prevents the backflow of the blood from the aorta back into the left ventricle, just like the pulmonary simulant valve prevents the flow or the backflow of blood from the pulmonary artery back into the right ventricle. Okay, go. There we go.